So we're going to talk about the myth of Prometheus today, but not just the myth, but the way the myth plays out across our modern landscape. And there are artists and thinkers who are connecting some of the ideas of the story of Prometheus to the modern day landscape, which includes, in particular, artificial intelligence. It's hard to explain what this show is going to be, but it's going to be really interesting. And we're going to conclude the show with, in the final segment, a conversation about the much maligned movie Prometheus, which, when you look at it again, really does touch on some of the more profound themes that stretch across thousands of years and make the myth of Prometheus very relevant to our modern conversations. I know I didn't sound particularly coherent or confident, but I think this is going to be a good show.
Once upon a time there was a railroad line. Don't ask where, brother, don't ask where. It was a road to hell. Oh, it was hard times. It was a world of gods and man. It's an old song. It's an old song. It's an old tale from way back when. It's an old song. It's an old song. We're gonna sing it again.
Yep, it's an old song, and we're going to sing it again. The myth of Prometheus is an old song that we've sung again and again across the ages. It's like any good myth. It's durable, it's mutable, it's applicable to all kinds of moments across millennia. And it seems especially relevant right this moment. So with that in mind, we're going to explore kind of the bones and flesh of the myth itself. We are going to talk to someone doing something very creative with the ideas behind that myth and kind of incorporating essentially AI, which is good. AI will come up again and again across all of this. A little bit later in the show, we're going to talk to critic A.O. Scott, who's been writing a bit about Prometheus having a moment. And then towards the end of the show, yes, in 2012, well, released in 2013, there was a movie called Prometheus. It was a prequel to the Alien series. It was, I wouldn't say it was totally disparaged or dismissed, but it was not greeted or didn't kind of rise to the expectations of fans of that franchise. There's been a little bit of a reassessment. We're going to talk about that. Certainly, you go back and look at that movie and just think about Prometheus, and you see a slightly different movie. All right, so let's begin with someone who's joined us before. Adrienne Mayer is a research scholar in the Classics Department in the History of Science program at Stanford University. She is the author of Gods and Robots, Myths, Machines, and Ancient Dreams of Technology, among her other books. In just a few minutes, also joining the conversation will be Annie Dorson, a theater director who works at the intersection of algorithmic art and live performance. Her most recent production was Prometheus, Firebringer. She's the recipient of a MacArthur Fellowship. Oh, let's just call it a genius grant. What's the point of getting a MacArthur Fellowship if you're not a certifiable genius, as a result of it? If I got one, I would only refer to it as a genius grant. Anyway, in that very unlikely event. So Adrienne Mayer, get us going here. Just maybe a little refresher course for people. Just give us, the bones of the Prometheus story. And welcome back, by the way.
Thank you. The story of Prometheus, it's the story of the creation of life on Earth, really. Prometheus, in one version of the myth, actually made the first humans, but the myth begins with Prometheus and his younger brother Epimetheus, who are setting the first prototypical animals and humans on Earth. And Epimetheus, the younger brother, is given the task of sort of programming all life on Earth with its capabilities and powers. And he gets very busy giving all these apps, I guess you could call them, to all the animals. Their keen hearing, exquisite eyesight, claws, talons, big fangs, powerful jumps that can fly. All these things he's giving to the animals, on land and sea and in the sky. And when Prometheus comes to check on his work, it turns out that Epimetheus has forgotten to give anything to humans. Human beings are now just these weak, sort of vulnerable creatures. And Prometheus is appalled, of course, and he feels pity for them. So he actually steals fire from the gods and teaches the first humans the secrets of fire, which allows them then to not only, make tools, but they can gather around fires and invent language. They plan cooperative projects. They can protect themselves, and they increasingly manipulate the world around them because they have this technology of fire. Well, the gods are not happy, especially Zeus, very angry about the theft of fire, and so he punishes Prometheus by chaining him to a rock cliff in the Caucasus Mountains and sending an eagle to come every day to gnaw on Prometheus's liver, which grows back in the night, and the eagle comes back, and it's just perpetual punishment and torture for Prometheus for stealing fire for humans.
Right. And so Prometheus is a titan, which is kind of a proto-god, the gods that were there before the gods that we know a little bit better. And so he can't be killed.
He's immortal.
He can only be chained up and tortured that way. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think in some versions of this, the eagle is not just a regular old eagle, but maybe kind of a robotic or semi-mechanical eagle made by Hephaestus.
Yes, there's a description of him in the Argonautica, which is some people think is an extremely old epic, maybe even older than Homer, where the eagle is said to have been created by Hephaestus, the god of invention and innovation, who made lots of automatons, and he supposedly made a mechanical eagle that would carry out that punishment of Prometheus. And in the Argonautica, it's described in a very mechanistic fashion, arriving exactly at the same time of each day, like clockwork, and its wings make a sort of whirring sound. It's very mechanistic. Yeah.
So, there's so many tripwires here, I think, that we kick again and again. But one of them, right at the beginning, is from the point of view of the gods, this is an artificial life form that Prometheus and Epimetheus, they've been and their names, Prometheus means forethought, Epimetheus means afterthought. Epimetheus is kind of the careless one.
The Greeks had a bit of a sense of humor about their
Epimetheus is not Mr. Measure Twice, Cut Once. He just starts cutting. But these are artificial life forms, right? And I think that's a place that this conversation could begin. You're very interested generally in the presence of things in Greek and other ancient mythologies that look an awful lot like robots, androids, automata. But from a certain point of view, humankind is artificial life and probably, in the eyes of Zeus, artificial intelligence.
Yes, and not just in the eyes of Zeus, but in the eyes of us humans ourselves. I mean, if a lot of automata were made in Greek mythology by Hephaestus, as I mentioned, with the eagle, he also made other automatons, including Pandora and various other animated statues that looked very lifelike and maybe even had primitive or prototypical AI. And when Prometheus is making the first prototypical humans, he's making them with tools. So we have lots of images, especially on carved gems, that show Prometheus creating the first prototypical humans using an array of tools, starting with the framework, with the skeletons, and then adding bodily parts. And it's a very charming image, but it kind of implies that humans might be automata. Are we just puppets of the gods? And I think that question, conundrum, was around since antiquity. Plato is one of the first to consider that idea when he says in the Laws, let's just suppose that each of us living creatures is a kind of puppet of the gods. So are we automata created by Prometheus?
Yeah, and I mean, there's also, I think, in there, well, first of all, you mentioned Pandora. We should say that Prometheus in some of the versions of the Pandora story, he has a significant role. Once again, Epimetheus, maybe not Mr. Think Things Through. He, seizes upon Pandora. He's kind of crazy about her. And Prometheus is going, maybe just ghost her. Maybe just block her on your phone or something. I don't really think that this is going to work out all that well. But so all of these things kind of contain the idea that discovery can be really good and it can be really bad, right? There are consequences for finding fire. There are or stealing fire from the gods. There are big consequences for Prometheus, but for humankind too. Finding Pandora, all this bad stuff flies out. There's a lot of warning in this myth, I think.
Absolutely. I mean, Zeus punished Prometheus in a very harsh way, but he also devised a punishment for humankind. To punish them for accepting the gift of fire. Zeus is not a good god in these myths. He's very tyrannical, and he's the one who commissions Hephaestus to make a sort of fembot, a beautiful woman that's actually a trap for humans, and her only mission on Earth is to open that jar filled with misery, eternal misery for humans. So that's the punishment that Zeus devises for humanity, for accepting the gift of fire. And of course, he sends it to the perfect patsy, that's Epimetheus, who just goes for the short-term gains. And as you say, his brother Prometheus says, "She's wrong for you, bro. No, don't accept it." And we know that Epimetheus regretted his decision later, but it's too late then. So the story is just perfect for contemplating AI and robotics today, I think. We need more Promethean thinkers instead of Epimetheans who go for the short-term gains and are dazzled by what looks to be beautiful and marvelous.
So, yeah, and when we think about Prometheus himself, I mean, he is in many respects kind of a revolutionary. He's suggesting that humans need something that the gods prior to this were those sole possessors of Ralph Waldo Emerson, who's like a huge Prometheus fanboy, says Prometheus is the Jesus of the old mythology. He is the friend of man, stands between the unjust justice of the eternal Father and the race of mortals, and readily suffers all things on their account. That's not a tortured analogy, I don't think. I mean, there's kind
I
of
don't think so.
Go ahead, yeah, react to that.
I agree. Yeah. He was seen as the benefactor of humankind. He took care for his creation, the human beings that he created with technology, and then gave them the technology of fire. You could say that's the original technology. And over time, by the classical period, by the 5th century BC, Athenians were venerating this rebel Prometheus and his precious gift of fire and technology, right alongside of Athena and Hephaestus, the gods of the city. So you're right. Prometheus is seen as a sort of rebel hero.
So let's bring Annie Dorson into this. As I say, Annie Dorson has developed a stage presentation called Prometheus Firebringer, and it's time to hear from her. Annie Dorson, welcome to our conversation.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So you didn't get interested in Prometheus last summer. I mean, you've really been thinking about this guy for a while. What drew you to him?
Well, partly because of a lot of the things that you guys have already been talking about, because Prometheus is such a central figure in thinking about the relationship of technology and power. And then, of course, I got really interested when I realized that, we have this play Prometheus Bound from Aeschylus, or at least scholars are, they debate sometimes who really wrote it, but let's call it Aeschylus. And that was originally a trilogy. So there's 2 plays that are lost that tell the end of the story. Prometheus Bound finishes with, Prometheus sticking to his guns and refusing to give in to Zeus and holding on to his secrets, and this martyr figure who seems to suffer for humanity's benefit.
Right.
But there's 2 more chapters.
Yeah.
To the story.
Right.
Yeah.
Tantalizingly, this third leg of the trilogy, isn't there just one line left, quiet where need is and talking to the point? That's like all you've got to work with for starters?
That's all there is. So I started thinking almost, as a joke, there's so many claims made about what machine intelligence and AI can do. I started going around telling people, well, I'm going to use machine learning to finish that play. based on the one line, which of course is far beyond the capacity of probably any, technological tool, but definitely far beyond the capacity of what we've got right now. But that became the catalyst for this project that was, trying to think through what that third chapter might be, and maybe how our own views of technology and power would be different if we'd always had that third piece of the puzzle. A lot of scholars think that that third part of the story actually tells that Prometheus eventually surrenders to Zeus and capitulates, goes back to Mount Olympus and puts all of his foresight and ingenuity in the hands of this tyrant god. So that changes things a little bit.
Exactly. There are multiple endings to the Prometheus story.
We won that.
Yeah, some happy, some sad. So, but what's fascinating to me is that you're using GPT-3, a precursor to ChatGPT, to generate speculative versions of this story that's missing. In a way, you're using the Promethean fire that people worry about right now to talk about Prometheus. In other words, the thing you're using as a device to tell the story and maybe begin a conversation between you and your audience is, in fact, one of the things that makes people kind of nervous on a Prometheus/Pandora level. So respond to that.
Yeah, I mean, that's obviously very purposeful, and these tools are always ambivalent. We're used to thinking they can always be used for both good and bad, and how do we balance those things, and how do we try to mitigate the harms and increase the benefits? But there's another question which I've been interested in, and which I think a lot of people are thinking about in relation to generative AI, which is who controls these tools. Maybe it's not simply that they, in the abstract, can be used for good or for ill, but it also depends on, who owns them and who's deploying them for what purposes. If we think of Prometheus as somebody who's, giving these powerful tools, putting them in the hands of the little guy, and helping people sort of fight back against tyranny, well, that's a framing that I think we're kind of used to hearing from the tech companies, for example, who talk a lot about democratizing, who talk a lot about getting rid of gatekeepers and empowering people to do more. There's some truth in that, but historically, a lot of new technologies have also tended to increase the power and wealth of elites. When, big corporations own these tools, maybe they're not so great for the little guy in the long run.
So Adrienne Mayer, as she's talking, I'm thinking about somebody else that you have included in your Prometheus narrative, and that is Victor Frankenstein, or very specifically Mary Wollstone Shelley's Frankenstein, or The Modern Prometheus. That's the full title. So, I mean, long before there was ChatGPT, there was Dr. Frankenstein. Say how you see that story as she told it fitting into the narrative that we're exploring today.
Right. Mary Shelley was obviously strongly influenced by Promethean mythology. And just to talk again about what you were saying about tyranny and technology, that fear has been around since antiquity too. Notice that all of the automatons that are used in the heavens are sort of charming and beneficial, but once they interact with humans, once they are sent down to Earth like Pandora, things aren't so good for the humans. So that story's been around for a long time. Mary Shelley was, I think, interested in the idea of science overreaching itself. I mean, we've always had, as the stories of ancient automatons show from ancient Greece, that humans are always seeking to sort of copy or emulate nature, improve on nature, and then maybe even surpass nature. We've just got that impulse. I mean, Sophocles talked about how there's no one more ambitious or glorious than humans and their inventions, but we should never forget that they can be used for good or ill. And I think that's just what you guys were just talking about. And Mary Shelley is focusing on Frankenstein as the scientist who wants to create something really marvelous and beautiful. Unfortunately, his creation turns out to be ugly and grotesque, and also develops sentience and resents having been brought to life. And so the whole project backfires. And I think Mary Shelley what she really wants to draw attention to is this overreaching, a kind of arrogance or hubris of scientists who want to actually create life on their own without foresight.
So, Annie Dorson, I feel as though Prometheus Firebringer, probably no two performances were anything like the same. But in terms of a through line running through it all, was there a particular place you wanted the show to land, or was it more a set of questions and kind of a dialogue with the audience about all these issues? And I guess maybe if I'm saying that, what's really the issue you want them thinking about as they walk out?
Yeah. So, the piece had two parts. One of the parts is all created by these commercial AI products, ChatGPT and the other stuff. And the other side of the piece is a lecture that I'm giving about a lot of these questions that we're talking about right now. And, my lecture sort of ends with a question, which I think is the one I would like to leave people with, which is that when we think about ethics, there's a fundamental question. The fundamental question is this the world we want? And, that's a big question, obviously. But I like to think that we have still some possibility of making some decisions about the kind of world we want to be creating and the role that we want technology to play in that. Sometimes it feels as though we're all a little bit, subject to these tools. They arrive quickly. We have to get used to them. They're disorienting. And we don't seem to have very much choice in it. But I think we do. We do have a choice about what kind of world we want to be creating.
Yeah, Adrian Mayer, maybe just respond to that any way you want. I could sharpen that point, but I'd really rather almost hear what you think about what Annie's saying.
Well, I think if you go back to who you both mentioned who owns, who deploys, and who benefits from AI and robotics, and we can see there's a link between tyranny and technology in that they're always presenting their inventions as benign, but we can all imagine how they might go wrong. And so I think Mary Shelley was really interested in that. Aristotle was interested in that question. He said that automata should be considered to be property, because otherwise who will be responsible when things go wrong? And those kind of questions are being asked by Promethean thinkers about AI and robotics now. So I think that these questions are timeless, and it's really exciting that people are working on it both in the sciences and the humanities.
All right. I think we're going to stop there. The wonderful, wonderful guest. And it's a perfect segue into the next segment. We're talking to A.O. Scott, and we'll begin a little bit with Oppenheimer. Same kind of story, right? We have a terrible enemy. We need something to do that we can use to defeat this terrible enemy. And maybe people not thinking that much further than that. Adrian Mayer, research scholar in the Classics Department and History of Science program at Stanford. Her book, Gods and Robots, Myths, Machines, and Ancient Dreams of Technology, has a lot of what we're talking about. Annie Dorson, theater director who works in the intersection of algorithmic art and live performance. Her recent production was Prometheus Firebringer. Let's take a break. We'll come back. All right, joining us now is A.O. Scott, a critic at large for the New York Times Book Review, where he was formerly film critic. He's been on the show quite a few times, but it's been a while. We've missed him. He's the author of Better Living Through Criticism. Recently, he's been writing about some of these questions. In October, he wrote, "Are Fears of AI and Nuclear Apocalypse Keeping You Up? Blame Prometheus," and relatedly, and more recently, Literature Under the Spell of AI. So, I don't know, Tony Scott, maybe could we just begin with, I think you heard a lot of that conversation. Is there anything that you wanted to say before I lead you down some primrose path?
Well, I was fascinated by it, and I was really glad to hear sort of the deep links that both the guests were making between the ancient mythology, some of the oldest Western myths that we still have around, and these very, very contemporary anxieties that we have about the effects of technology, about who controls technology. I think especially about AI, sort of sometimes from the opposite direction also. There have been so many movies back when I was a movie critic, and I would see almost all of them, where the question is, at what point or in what way do these robots, do these creations, do these AI applications become human? When do they cross that boundary? Do they become sentient? Do they become self-reflexive? Do they feel pain? Do they fall in love? And therefore, what is our ethical obligation to them? That's also the question raised by Mary Shelley and Frankenstein. And I always think that those stories are stories where we're trying to puzzle out what it is that makes us human by kind of imagining these non-human or proto-human or almost human or becoming human creations. We're sort of shining a light back on ourselves and wondering what it is that defines us as the particular kind of creature that we are.
Right. And also, sitting within that question is also the question of what does any individual imagining of artificial intelligence think of us? And it can range from, probably the one people are most familiar with is Data from the Star Trek franchises, for him, humanity is kind of aspirational. He would like to be more human. He would like, can I laugh, really laugh at a joke? Those are one of his questions. A little bit later in the show, we're going to be talking about Prometheus, the movie, in which David, played by Michael Fassbender, basically thinks people suck. And that's an interesting question, too. You don't always like who made you. And you also might not particularly admire the behavior that you're supposed to be emulating as you're supposedly replicating human intelligence. But yeah, I'd love to hear your take.
Well, exactly, and I think there are sort of both. It goes both ways. Sometimes you have the AI or the robot, aspiring to be human, becoming human. You think of Steven Spielberg's film AI, where it's sort of the little boy who becomes something like human when because of his attachment to his human adoptive mother. But a lot of the time, we also project great fear and anxiety that these robots will take our intelligence and improve upon it to such an extent as to make us obsolete. And so sometimes that is played kind of for slightly comic or ironic effect, as in the Spike Jonze movie Her, where the app voiced by Scarlett Johansson, she's sort of the Joaquin Phoenix character, purchases her so she'll fall in love with him and be his girlfriend, and she basically just gets bored with him at a certain point, because her intelligence works so rapidly that she just kind of goes off and hangs out with a bunch of other AIs and leaves the human being behind. And then, of course, there are the examples of HAL in 2001, HAL 9000, the computer that shuts down humanity because humanity has sort of outlived its usefulness in whatever the cosmic scheme that movie is imagining, or the Terminator movies, where the Skynet program has basically decided that human beings will now be subservient and hunted and enslaved and exploited by the robots. So we toggle it back and forth. These poor robots that we may need to care for, that may love us, that we may love, that we maybe shouldn't exploit or mistreat or take advantage of, and then the kind of the inverse anxiety that they're going to be so powerful that they're just going to subjugate or even exterminate us.
So it's just kind of wired into us that when we're looking at modern and future questions, we tend to look at history. Like what happened before, how did we handle it? So it's probably no accident that Oppenheimer was such a big part of the conversation last year and heading into this year. And, they're not, I mean, obviously it comes from a book about Oppenheimer whose subtitle is American Prometheus, but even Nolan's movie itself, it begins with a quote on the screen. It says, Prometheus stole fire from the gods and gave it to man. For this, he was chained to a rock and tortured for eternity. And, I mean, you don't really have to be an expert in semiotics to figure out how that applies here. But it is that interesting moment of a Rubicon that you're about to cross technologically. And you think you need to cross it because you have terrible enemies and you have to vanquish them. And then some of the enemies become a little bit less effective. And it's the urgency changes a little bit. We see that in the movie. And we also see Oppenheimer himself drifting into grave misgivings. But yeah, give me your take there.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting movie in that way because there is certainly that political dimension where, for the U.S. military and the political leadership, the race to create a weapon before Germany or Japan do, and to use it even as the war is maybe drawing toward a close, to use it to show that the United States has it and has this power is one of the forces that's driving it forward. But what's fascinating to me is that for the scientist, it's a slightly different ambition, because what the successful development of the atomic bomb will mean to them is an empirical proof of their theory. So you have the theory of the quantum universe, which has been just revolutionizing physics in the earlier decades of the 20th century, and which has been entirely a kind of a blackboard theoretical, it's all of these equations. This is one of these movies where there's a lot of writing on blackboards, a lot of very, very furious, very, people smoking cigarettes, writing on blackboards. That's how real science is happening. But it's almost like the bomb is a kind of proof of concept for people like Oppenheimer and Edward Teller and Richard Feynman and all of the people working on the Manhattan Project from the scientific side, from the theoretical side. They want to see when they're looking at the Trinity test in the New Mexico desert, they're not even thinking so much about, well, this is going to help us defeat Japan, but if this works, this will prove the theory of the quantum universe, which is an entirely radical and revolutionary understanding of the structure of matter and the universe. And it's almost what happens then when the bombs are dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki is almost like this kind of terrible side effect. Oh my gosh, wait, we did this too. Because there's this great sort of awe and jubilation when the tests succeed, and then there's a kind of horror and panic and a profound kind of sense of guilt and uncertainty and ambivalence and regret on Oppenheimer's part in the aftermath.
And not to beat our theme to death, but that's very true to kind of the Promethean trope, that this is great short term, maybe it's not so great long term, maybe there are consequences that we're undreamt of. This is a story we tell ourselves over and over again. But, if Christopher Nolan ever wanted to do anything so unlikely and predictable as do another movie of this type, von Neumann would be a really interesting movie because, first of all, he's kind of a coaxial cable stretching from Oppenheimer, maybe even to the present in AI. I know what you talked a little bit in one of your pieces about a novel about von Neumann, but just to help people, he probably builds the first real computer that we could identify in the context of our other computers. It's called MANIAC, Mathematical and Numerical Integrator and Computer. And von Neumann, if he were to say, I am become death, destroyer of worlds, he'd go, and that's great. And he's very different from Oppenheimer. But yeah, give me a little bit of your take there.
Yeah, well, I was fascinated, and I wrote this piece partly because this book, which is a really wonderful book that I think should have more readers and get more attention, by the Chilean novelist Benjamin Labatut, called The Maniac. And the fact that it and Oppenheimer were coming out at the same time just struck me as such a kind of one of those great coincidences that you just have to go to an editor and say, I want to write a piece about this without necessarily knowing what the piece is going to be. But von Neumann was, I mean, he's a fascinating parallel figure to Oppenheimer. They're born around the same time. They grew up in affluent, assimilated Jewish families. Oppenheimer in New York, von Neumann in Budapest. He came to the United States during the war. But if Oppenheimer is kind of a haunted and tormented figure in that film, and just sort of almost undone by the enormity of what he has unleashed. Von Neumann has no such qualms. He's just, he's first of all just an almost pathologically productive and brilliant scientist. He invented AI, he invented the computer, he invented game theory. He was also on the Manhattan Project. He was he a mathematician? Was he a physicist? He just was a kind of a 20th century polymath. He was at the Institute for Advanced Study in Princeton, which Oppenheimer was the director of after the war, and that is where a lot of the work on the early computers was done. And his belief, I mean, you're talking about unintended consequences and the sort of the long-term logic of technological development. And he had no problem with it. He sort of said, you throw the dice and that's how it goes. You invent these things and the computer will do what it does. The technology will follow the logic that is internal to it, and there's nothing we can do about it. And so we might as well welcome it. So his idea, the sort of the ideas that we have now of AI taking over or causing our extinction, or all of the sort of the more kind of dystopian and alarming projections that are sometimes out there, he would say, well, if that's how it's going to go, that's how it's going to go. And, that's just how it is.
Right. Actually, von Neumann also, I mean, he really does initially come up with a kind of real Ridley Scott sounding idea of universal assemblers, a species of self-replicating robots. I mean, think about that. He's got that idea of 48, 49. That's when he's thinking about all this stuff.
No, he is way out front. I mean, when you think that what computers were in those, it just mechanically what they were was like punch cards and just all of these sort of wires and plugs, and the idea that you could imagine that, you could theorize that application on that sort of mechanical platform is astonishing. And he also said, there's the quote that's in the book. He said, well, if you tell me what a machine can't do, and I will make the machine that does it.
Yeah, and I think we're going to have to end there. But I think the other part of this is, until the real last chapter of The Human Race gets written, it's hard to know what the last chapter is. These things go through iterations. Things that look good turn bad. Things that turn bad sometimes can turn better. We may be saved ultimately by nuclear power. We don't know. But Tony's,
and I think too that history also has its twists and turns. That the fears of nuclear extinction that certainly defined my childhood and adolescence in the Cold War have been replaced by other ones.
Right.
So, I don't know if that's comforting or not.
Yeah, a little of each. But Tony Scott, thanks so much for your time today. Great to have your voice back on our show.
Great talking with you, Colin. Thank you.
Why don't we take a little break here, and we'll come back and we'll do a reassessment of a movie that Tony probably did review at some point. At some point being 2013. We're going to talk about the movie Prometheus.
Comparable to Milton's version of Satan, creator of man by means of clay. As I built and I molded, a new life took shape, and that new life was met with greed. So I stole God's fire, so all a humankind could see. And now I'm tortured, condemned, I was cast out. I threw a rock at God's break glass house.
All episodes of The Colin McEnroe Show are available 24/7 on any podcast app. If there's a place for reviews and ratings, give us lots of stars and be sure to mention the high thread count in our sheets and pillowcases, as well as the complimentary breakfast buffet. Have a question or comment? Email us at colinshow@ctpublic.org. Now, back to the show.
And thanks, Sabrina, and thanks to Kat Pastor. She's our technical producer. Our senior producer is Lily Tyson. She produced this episode specifically. Yes, and we're going to spend the last bit of the show talking about a movie that I think has suffered a certain number of slings and arrows and is now enjoying, if movies can enjoy things, a reconsideration. One of the people doing that reconsideration is our guest, Dom Nero, writer, video editor, and co-host of Eye of the Duck, a podcast about movies and scenes that make them special. Maybe, Dom, before we get into what I want to ask you about, I think you've been listening to a lot of the conversation so far. So given what you've heard, are you able to plug your thoughts about the movie? We should say the movie Prometheus is a prequel to Alien. It was directed by Ridley Scott, the creator of Alien. It anticipates... Well, we won't even say anything more about that. I'll just let you react. How do you see everything we've been talking about manifesting in this movie?
Well, thanks so much for having me, Colin.
Sure.
I'm so excited that I get to be the person to spread the joy and love of Prometheus. I think it's a deceptively deep movie. It's a powerful movie. It's a pretty heavy movie. And after listening to this conversation, which has been great, I feel illuminated a bit on what is going on in terms of like the mythological underpinnings of this film. You know, when I went into this in high school and I saw it, I think what I saw was a movie where the ship is called Prometheus. And now, after listening to everything I just heard, I see there's so much depth to what Scott is exploring with this myth. I think it's something that has become kind of important to him in this late stage of his career.
Yeah, I absolutely think so too. And we should say, I did the same thing. I watched the movie again, thinking about all these kinds of questions. And it does seem as though one of the themes that jumps pretty easily from Plato to Ridley Scott is that idea of who made us. So, in Greek mythology, either Prometheus made us, he sculpted us out of clay, or Prometheus, beholding this kind of semi-useless naked ape, thought, oh boy, they're going to need something. They're going to get eaten on the first day. So let's give them fire. Let's give them knowledge of fire. That'll give them a running start. In this movie, you have a group of scientists and explorers in the future. It's like 2095 or something. I can't remember, but it's something like that. They are they believe they know where there might be a race of beings who made us. So they're looking for their makers. But they're also accompanied by a kind of snide and occasionally resentful creature, an artificial intelligence named David, played by Michael Fassbender, who's also been made. It isn't really crazy about how all of that's playing out. I don't know. What are you hearing or thinking about as I say that?
What I think Scott is most interested in this film is sort of the audacity of humans and the audaciousness of this scientist who is going to this other planet to find the origins of human life. Now, that I think is okay, but when they wake up this creature, this engineer that they call them in the film, who may or may not have created humanity, I think what the engineer sees in us is something that he doesn't like all that much. I think that these audacious humans are sort of assuming that when we meet our creators, the creators will, leap for joy. Oh my God, we made you. Look at how far you've come. And in the film, and I think this might have been something that people really bristled against when it first came out, in the film, when the engineer takes one look at us and seeing the greed and corruption and I mean, especially of Peter Wayland, who it's revealed that what he's really searching for, not so much the origins of human life, but but eternal life. He simply wants eternal life. When our creators find that, they're not so pleased. And that creates for a really powerful and compelling statement for a film that I think to most of us was just going to sort of bring back this very confined, concise horror series, the Alien series, which is known for these little, I mean, not only is it known, but it kind of started this tradition of these small contained creature features. Then Ridley Scott comes back and he says something like, maybe humanity does not deserve the advantages and the technology that we have. That's a pretty devastating thing to say.
Right. So let's actually hear a little bit of, this is kind of the eye of the duck moment from the film. You're going to hear Wayland, who's who's this, well, he's the business owner and he's the person who's funding this expedition for all the reasons that you just said. And you'll also hear the scientist, Dr. Shaw. They are kind of waking up with the assistance of David, the artificial intelligence. They're kind of waking up the head of this engineer, this creator of us. This is C1 Cat.
Speak to him, David. Tell him we came, just like he asked.
Ask him where they're from.
What are you doing?
Ask him what's in his cargo. It killed his people.
Sure. Enough. David.
You made it here, and it was meant for us. Why?
Sure, enough. For God's sake, shut her up.
Wasn't it? I need to know why. What did we do wrong? Why do you hate us?
Is he over somehow, the dead shooter? David, continue. Tell him why I came.
Manamai. Chiama mortus teda. Uiva. On itam sostater creda.
So there's your eye of the duck moment. Although, Dom, I would say that my eye of the duck moment, there's sort of a companion eye of the duck moment for me, and it's a very quick conversation between David, the android or whatever we want to call him, and Charlie, who's I think the most arrogant and aspirational of the scientists leading this quest. And I don't have the clip here, but I mean, there's that. Charlie says that he wants to know from these makers, from these engineers, why they made us. And David said, well, I mean, what about why I was made? And Charlie says, we made you because we could do it. And then David says, can you imagine how disappointing it would be to have the people who made you say that? The implication being it's very disappointing to David. And that's, I mean, we are, in fact, kind of reviled on either side. We're reviled by our makers, and we are reviled by what we have made. Nobody particularly likes humans in this movie.
It reminds me of the quote, the famous Jeff Goldblum quote from Jurassic Park. Your scientists were so preoccupied with whether or not they could, they didn't stop to think if they should.
Right. So we should say the Alien franchise goes on and on. Noah Hawley's going to adapt it for television. He's not going to use any of this that's in Prometheus from what we can tell. But, in the minutes that we have left, and we don't have many, but let's imagine somebody has a little bit of free time and either didn't see the movie because the reviews weren't all that great at the beginning, or word of mouth wasn't terrific, or because or they started it and didn't finish it, or whatever. Make the case to go back and see what's there, what's worth seeing.
Well, I mean, so if you're a fan of the Alien series, which I am a huge fan of, we did a mini series on it on our podcast, and I think it's one of the rare franchises that is as much an intellectual movement as it is just a series of like really fun, action populist movies. If you're a fan of that, I mean, there's no question that you need to check out Prometheus. Scott comes back to the series so many years later, and we're all expecting him to kind of just bring back the xenomorph. We want to hang out with the xenomorph again. What a great monster. What a great, horror, a horror icon. But what he really gets us here is, he redefines the franchise. And this is a franchise that more or less has, created a genre onto itself. I mean, what Ridley Scott has done for science fiction between Blade Runner, between Alien, it changed the game. So Scott doesn't just come back with a new take on the xenomorph. He comes back with this really meaningful and like ponderous film that it has a message that is kind of like scary to contend with. I mean, I think at this stage of his career, he is really into like casting judgment on like the sins of men. I mean, Scott has been around for so many years as a filmmaker. I think of all the filmmakers who was allowed to do that, I think we can give him a pass. And, people didn't like it. I think, a lot because the people, the humans in the film, are stupid.
That is true. We're going to have to stop there, Dom Nero. But if people want to know more, Dom is the co-host of Eye of the Duck, a podcast about movies and scenes that make them special, including this movie. Thanks for joining us today. Thanks for listening, those of you who did. And we will be back tomorrow with another show.